Okay, so I wanted to talk about measuring SPAs because soft navigations are hard. And I've been thinking a lot about measuring soft navigations, and there are a few inherent problems there that I think I may have tackled, but I wanted to share that with y'all and get your opinions. Uh, First of all, some a little bit of an explanation on what soft navigations are, because apparently some folks are not familiar with that term. I'm not sure if this is like I think it's a term you use often in the working group, but they're also called same document navigations. And with the history API, the way that they typically work is a user clicks on something that click event is typically canceled, typically results in fetching of content. Uh, at some point, a push state may happen to modify the URL that is presented to the user. And then DOM modifications happen to show the user the new page that presents that content. There are a lot of typicallys here, and it is a very unorganized and not well-structured process that is implemented differently in different frameworks, as well as in vanilla JavaScript for developers who just implement those transitions on their own. There is a new proposal for an app history API that is triggering a navigate event either from a user-initiated click on links or forms, so essentially on semantic elements, or through a JavaScript API, app history navigate, that gives essentially tells the browser you need to navigate to this URL. And then the transition, the DOM modifications part, as well as the fetching, happens as part of a transition while method that is on the event, navigate event itself. And the developer passes that transition while call with a promise. That promise typically has calls to fetch the content and modify the DOM to present the new page to the user. And when the promise is resolved, that's when the transition is done and the new same document navigation is committed. Yeah, so what's hard about soft navigations? For once, there is no clear start point, and I'm talking here mostly about the history API model. We don't really know when that navigation has started. It's hard to link that final result, that navigation, to the initial user click event if one even happened. It's hard to distinguish URL changing interactions from navigations. There are a lot of small page interactions that maintain state as part of the URL, so called push state API. And then it's very hard to distinguish them from soft navigations that modify large parts of the DOM, arguably. And it's a very touchy subject, and a lot of people have different opinions about what is a navigation and what's an interaction. And yes, Michael. And finally, there is no, like, it's very hard to correlate the paint operations that happen after soft navigation happened to the actual soft navigation. So there could be paint operations that happen automatically over time, so like periodically, and they can happen right after the user clicked on a link that resulted in a soft navigation, but that doesn't mean that that paint is the first paint of that new soft navigation. It's very hard to correlate the two. Regarding the no clear starting point, the app history API that I mentioned earlier they came up with the concept of a user-initiated navigation. That is a navigation that is triggered by the user clicking on an actual semantic element, either an anchor or a form, and that is resulting in a navigation. So a navigation where if the app history wouldn't be there and JavaScript is not supported, it will just happen as a multi-page app. That seems like a good direction to steer developers towards. It also gives us a very clear start point for such navigations. And while app history solidified that concept, maybe it's a concept we can also borrow for like traditional history API navigations, potentially. Then for interactions versus navigations, that is a rabbit hole I spent a lot of time on. And a few ideas were to detect paints to the main event. And then there were concerns that people will just add, like what happens with multiple main events, which is a possibility. What happens when the main, like not event, main elements. What happens when the main element is on a small part of the screen, or would that result in, incentivizing developers to misuse main in weird ways, and that didn't, there were a lot of questions raised. Then another thought was to look at the percentage of the screen painted, but that naturally creates weird cliffs where if you paint 48% of the screen, that is not a navigation, but if you paint 49, that is suddenly becoming a navigation, and that causes weird bimodal effects. And then finally, with the help of a few folks who helped me and reviewed my work, we realized that we can essentially filter interactions based on past hard navigations and avoid falling into that trap. So essentially, a way for us to distinguish interactions from navigations would be to say navigations are ones that we've seen past hard navigations for. And that can help us in the RUM case to say, okay, these are potentially like interactions, so we don't group them into the navigations group when collecting statistics, because presumably those are like, they can be infinitely fast. They don't necessarily have to fetch content where navigations typically do. And regarding paint correlation, that is a very similar problem to the responsiveness problem. I borrowed Nicholas's diagram for this, where we have, like, for responsiveness, we currently know to keep track of the events between the input, like the user has clicked on a thing, then the renderer received the input event, the renderer starts processing the event handlers, and then was done processing the event handlers. And then right now, we just show the next frame painted on screen as a potential result of that responsiveness. But this exact same problem that we have for soft navigations exists for responsiveness, where we don't know, we don't know that that next frame is indeed related to that user action. And there is potentially async work that can happen and need to be completed before an actual related frame is presented on screen. So we have a similar problem here for both responsiveness and soft navigations. So I looked into that from the angle of the app history API. And that helps for soft navigations because it limits the needed task tracking to only promise chains, because the developers pass along a promise to transition while, and then that promise is eventually at some point modifying the DOM, and that results in a paint. So any promise that dirties the DOM is paint causing, and we can track that back to the navigation if we can track promise chains. That led me to look into promise hooks, which is an interesting V8 internal API, but unfortunately it has some performance implications that made the V8 folks not like me so much when I proposed to use that for promise hook tracking. At the same time, they suggested that I will try to look at tracking tasks from the renderer side. I did that, and the result is that I now have a prototype that enables me, maybe I'll do a quick demo. And let me share my screen. And it is not a pretty demo, but I essentially have a Chromium build where I can see the different tasks and essentially provide them with a number and keep track. Each task has can keep track of its parent task, and that way we can essentially keep around the dependency graph for tasks that enables us to know that a task-specific paint inducing task was triggered by a navigation event. So here I have essentially the app history demo page. And if I'm clicking on this subpage, I made a soft navigation. And here, maybe you can even see, essentially, I can see that the task that resulted in a layout is a child, a descendant task of the task that induced the navigation. And we can also go up the tree and see that task 495 was triggered by 488, which was triggered by 480, which is the task that was dispatched from the navigate event and resulted in fetch and and eventually that layout operation. So I'll go back to presenting the actual slides. So essentially, I think that it's far from done, and there is still a bunch of problems. For example, my current prototype doesn't handle well userland promises. So promises that are created in JavaScript are not well handled right now. I have a plan on handling them. I need to actually implement that. But essentially, it seems like there is a path to enable paint correlation between the navigate event or click events and the DOM operations that triggered them. The implications for that is that we may not have to rely on app history for paint correlation, as well as for a starting point. Maybe we can mimic the same semantics for history API based SVAs. Responsiveness could potentially use the same mechanism. And then maybe this has implications on long task attribution, assuming we can translate task names from the random numbers that I gave them into actual names that mean something to someone. A few caveats here. We cannot track all tasks. For example, if there are data queues and certain, for both, for any kind of task tracking. If people are putting data into a queue and then reading it later after a timeout from a separate task, we don't have a way to correlate those tasks and say these are like, those tasks are a continuation of one another. I think that from at least from a navigation perspective, I think this is fine. I think that we can essentially tell developers that if they want to be able to track soft navigations, this is not something they should be doing as part of their navigation flow. I'm not sure that this is similarly fine for responsiveness, as well as long tasks. This could interrupt the task chain. We need to this requires some more thinking. So the approach I'm taking is not revolutionary, but it might be easier to implement when task scheduling is centralized. I'm not sure that this is something that is true for all task, like render-based task implementations in all browsers. So feedback on that would be useful and interesting. And then finally, if we wanted to expose paint events as a result of this paint correlation tracking for those soft navigations, there may be security restrictions on the number of paint events we can expose at a certain amount of time to avoid developers gaming this somehow and trying to get more paint events than they should in order to, for example, sniff out the visibility, not like visited links. It's possible that the requirement for like user initiated navigations would make it so that this throttling is not needed, but I'm not sure. I have not run this with security folks. Okay, so if we can detect soft navigations, what do we do with that? So Dominic made the proposal for reporting same document entries. Those entries include a starting point, which is the start of navigate event. They include an endpoint, which is currently the point in time in which the developer resolved the promise passed along to transition while. And there is an ongoing discussion on the API shape for both for both same document entries as well as for other navigation-like entries. One result of past discussions from this is that we need a navigation ID that will help us to correlate other performance entries with that navigation. So resource timing entries, user timing entries, etc., and will enable us to group them per navigation, and that will help us with both like with real navigations and then BF cache navigations and soft navigations. So the plan here is to increment that navigation ID per soft navigation that will enable us to keep track of those other entries. And that is also like doesn't necessarily require paint correlation. And app history can do that with a clear starting point. Maybe we can adopt the same for history API SPAs potentially. But the paint correlation bit enables us to expose paint timing for those same document navigations. So we would be able to just fire new paint timing entries, and the navigation ID will help us correlate them with the relevant navigation. And like I said, this may or may not depend on app history it's still a subject to be explored. So essentially, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this subject. I know that Nick brought up SPAs as a huge pain point. So this is me trying to fix this. And I'll now stop the recording and we can discuss.